What's going on, guys? In this video I want to talk about delegates and protocols. A lot of videos that you'll see out there are talking about delegates and protocols in the sense of one view controller communicating with another. I'm going to take a slightly different approach with this video, and I'm going to talk about using delegates and protocols to communicate between a custom nib component that you've created. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Let's create a single view application. Let's call this delegates and protocols. And we'll just throw that here on the desktop. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started by jumping into the, let's start with the view controller actually. And I hate that they originally named the view controller, so let's call this lander view controller, because this is the view controller that we will initially land on. So let's go to the main storyboard, and this will now be incorrect. So let's come over here and let's change this to lander view controller. Okay, so now these are in sync. So now let's go ahead and just do some initial setup here, and we'll throw on a button. And let's constrain that button 20 from the sides and bottom, and then we'll set the height to 44 as kind of a standard. That's like a minimum height that Apple recommends. So we've got that nice down there. Let's go ahead and make this button a little easier to see. We'll set the background color to green, and we will set the text color to white. And let's actually make this bold just so it's a little bit easier to see. Awesome, great, got our button. Now let's go ahead and open up the assistant editor. When we click this button, what we're going to do in this particular video is we are going to create a custom pop-up component. So what we want this button to do is to display that pop-up component. So let's go ahead and do our typical IB action. Let's control drag this over here, and we'll say on show pop-up. All right, we'll say on show button tap. Awesome. Okay, for now, let's go ahead and close the assistant editor. Let's come back over here to the button, and we'll change the text here to show pop-up. Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and create our custom component. And to do that, I'm going to actually use a custom nib. So we'll start by creating a new file, and we'll create a view, and we'll call the view Popup View. In a lot of videos, people tend to just create their layouts programmatically. I actually like to show people how to use Zibs to accomplish this, because a lot of people are familiar with storyboards and the interface builder, and this makes it very easy and straightforward to kind of get started with some more complicated component layouts. But this is going to be really simple, but I just want to show how to use this. So with that being said, right now I've got what looks like a phone screen of an iPhone XR, but we're actually going to resize this. So let's set this to freeform, and let's get rid of the top and bottom nav bars. Or sorry, the top and bottom bars. And let's resize this thing down to something more like what we're going to be seeing. So I want to be clear, when we talk about these custom views, it really doesn't matter what size they are. The size is kind of arbitrary, because we're going to set the size really in code or in the interface builder anyways of the storyboard. So what we put here really doesn't matter. So I'm just going to resize this down to what looks kind of appropriate. You might notice we've got this little bar here at the bottom for the iPhone X. Just to get rid of that, we'll just change it to a phone that doesn't have that. Great. So now what we're going to do is, for now, this pop-up is just going to have a button, and the button is going to just say close. And let's constrain this thing just to be centered. And let's give it also a height of 44, and we'll give it a width of 100. Awesome. So what we'll do now is we'll set the background color to red. Since this is a close button, we'll set the text color to white, and we will set the font to bold as well. And let's make it a little bigger. Awesome. Okay, so now that we've got the Zib set up, we need to create its corresponding subclass just like we do with a view controller. So let's create a new file. Let's create a Cocoa Touch class just like we would with a view controller, and let's call this a pop-up view as well. Okay, great. Now we have the corresponding popupview.swift file. This, what I'm about to show you, is going to appear to be a little bit different than a view controller, but I'll try to talk through it and explain it as best as possible. So the first thing we need to do for a UI view is we need to have two initializers. So let's go ahead and start with the frame initializer, and we'll call super.init, and we'll pass in that frame there. And then we also need an initializer, this coder initializer here, and we'll call super.init coder a decoder. Okay, so what are these? So this first initializer here is an initializer that's going to be called whenever you create this custom component programmatically, and this bottom initializer here is what's going to be called if you use this custom component inside of a storyboard. So this kind of presents us with a little bit of a weird problem. So if we want to do some logic inside the initializer, we want this thing to be flexible enough that it can execute that code regardless of which initializer is invoked, whether we do it programmatically or we do it in a storyboard. It shouldn't matter. So a pretty common practice is to create a private function called common init, or whatever you want to call it, and we will call that inside both of these initializers. So that way the same functions or the same functionality gets executed regardless of which initializer is called. So great. Now that we're here, let's come back over to the Zib here and let's connect the two. Let's open up the assistant editor. Here we actually have the header file. Let's go into the file owner and let's change this to pop-up view. Okay, now the assistant editor should update, and we're going to take this view here and we're going to create an outlet, and we'll just call it view, and let's set this to weak, and we'll connect. Okay, great. This is where it gets a little bit different though than a storyboard, or sorry, than a view controller, because what we need to do here is we need to initialize and instantiate the nib that we just created, which is this right here. So with that being said, to do that, we are going to call this thing here UI nib, and the nib name is just simply the name of the file, the zib file that we just created, and that's obviously pop-up view, and we'll set the bundle to nil. Here, let me close the assistant editor so it's a little bit easier to see, and then we'll call .instantiate with an owner of self, and options we'll set to nil. And then we need to set the view up here .frame equal to self.bound so that the view takes up the entire size of this view that we just created, and then we'll add the subview to self here. So this is obviously a little bit different than what you're used to with view controllers. You don't have to like add the view controller to the view controller or anything like that, but in this case we have to do this because the zib and the this UI view class here are kind of fundamentally different, and so all that we're really doing when we set the file owner here is just saying that we can basically we're just trying to add this view that we've created in this nib here, or in this zib, sorry, here. So anyways, with that being said, the next thing that we need to do is come back over to, or sorry, we'll come back into the zib here, and let's reopen the assistant editor, and let's create an action for this close button that we're not going to do anything with at the moment, but we need to have it here regardless, so when we're ready to connect it we can. So we'll call this on close button tap. Great, and inside this block we need to tell the view controller to close me. Awesome. So how do we do that? So let's jump back over to the view controller really quick and let's see kind of what we're working with. So what we need to do is we need to create a function here called close pop-up, let's say. And this is what's going to be responsible for making the pop-up go away. So before we get into this, let's go ahead and start by showing what it takes to get the view to actually come into view in the first place when we click the show button. So to do that, we're going to say if let window equal UI application dot shared dot key window. And basically what this is the size of the window that we're working with, so that I can define some constraints that we're going to use to display the pop-up view. Oh, sorry, we need to first start by creating the pop-up view up here. Okay, great. So I'm going to create it up here to begin with. If you wanted to, you could create this every time that we click the button, but I'm going to go ahead and create it since this is kind of the sole purpose of the application anyways. And so then what we're going to do is inside here, we need to define what the frame of this pop-up view is whenever it's initially created. And that's going to be a, we'll set the frame equal to a CG rect. And the CG rect, we're going to use this origin and size one down here. And the origin is going to be a CG point. Let's grab this X and Y CG float one here. And we'll set the X to 10 so that it's 10 from the left. And we're also going to get 10 from the right, but I'll do that here in a second. The Y is going to be window.frame.size.height. And the reason we're doing this is so that the top of the view is at the bottom of the page when it's first created, so that we're actually not seeing it. And then the size is going to be a CG size. We'll get this width and height one here. And the width is going to be the window.frame.size.width minus 20. That way it's 10 from the left and 10 from the right. And then the height we'll just set to an arbitrary height of 200. Okay, great. So now we've got our initial frame set up. So let's go ahead and add that view to the subview here. Okay. And then we want to animate it up. So we'll simply do UI view.animate, and we'll grab this one right here. And we're going to set the duration to ½ a second. We'll set the delay to 0. We're going to set the options to this curve ease in out so that it's got this nice animation. And then let's set the animation. So what we're going to do here is we're going to redefine the frame of the pop-up view. So let's just copy this code here and paste it. And the only thing that we really need to change is the Y value for now. So instead of window.frame.size.height, we want to put it in the middle. So we'll say divided by 2. Problem with this right here is it's going to put the top of the pop-up view in the middle because this is based on the top of the frame. So to get it in the middle of the actual component, we'll say minus self.popup view.frame.size.height divided by 2. That way it'll put it right in the middle. Okay, great. We need to also put self here. And then the completion for now will just be nil. Okay, so if we go ahead and run this. Oh, whoops, wrong simulator. Let's run this on the XS right here. If we run this, we'll see that it floats up real nicely. Okay, so one thing that we'll do real quick to make this look a little bit better and a little bit easier to see is let's go ahead and add an image view. Let's open this guy all the way up, and then we will constrain it to the super view, not the safe view, so that way it takes up the whole thing. If I can grab it. There we go. Okay, and let me go ahead and throw my image in here. I have an image that I already had, so I'm just going to throw that in here. It's just a nice mountain background. Let's come back over to the storyboard. And let's set that image to that background, and let's do aspect fill. Great. So now when we run this, it'll be a little bit easier to see what's going on, and you'll see that nice little curve ease in animation that we did. Whoops, looks like I need to put the background behind the button. There we go. Animates in real nicely, but unfortunately when we click the close button, nothing happens. So this is where delegates and protocols come into play. So when we come back here and we come to the pop-up view, what we need to do is inside of this on close button tap, we need to tell the view controller that it's time to do something. So if we come back here to the view controller, this is where we're going to be animating the pop-up down. So before we do that though, we need to tell the pop-up view who it is that's telling it to do these certain instructions. So that's called a delegate. So we're gonna create a variable called delegate. And what type is it? So one thing we could do is we could technically set this to a type of lander view controller, and that way we could call a function down here called delegate dot close pop-up, and this would actually work fine. This would totally work without any hiccups in it, and it would do exactly what we wanted it to do. It would execute that function just like we told it to. The problem with this though is that this isn't necessarily a reusable way of having this component work, because obviously this only works for the lander view controller, and that's really not going to work for us in any kind of scalable application. We probably want to have this pop-up view on many different pages that all have very different functionality, but they should have the same functionality when it comes to the pop-up. So to do that, we need to create some kind of conformance, and that's actually called a protocol. And we'll put it in this file for right now. We'll call this protocol, and the normal naming convention for this would be Popup View Delegate or something similar. And you've probably seen similar protocols whenever you're working with things like page view controllers or things of that nature that Apple has provided to you in the standard in the stuff that they provide. So what we need to do inside of this protocol is we need to define what I like to call like a blueprint, and a lot of other people will use that terminology as well, because it kind of is. A protocol is essentially a blueprint of what you should find inside of something that conforms to this. So what does that mean? So if we create a function and we're going to call it close pop-up, basically what we're saying is anything that conforms to this protocol needs to have this function. That way, instead of having a delegate of lander view controller, we can have a delegate of type popup view delegate. Okay, but now this isn't going to work because the view controller needs to be of that type. So all we have to do here is extend this popup view delegate. Now it's going to require this view controller to have this function, like I said, that blueprint. So what happens if we remove this? Well, if we give Xcode a second to think, it's going to tell us type lander view controller does not conform to the protocol that we've told it to because it does not contain that function. So now if we put that function back, this warning will go away because it needs this functionality. Okay, so we're almost there. So now what needs to happen is this this view subclass needs to know what delegate it is so that it can call this method. So all we have to do to make that happen is we just say popup view.delegate equals self, and we can do that because self is of type popup view delegate because we've extended it that protocol. So hopefully this is all kind of coming together for you now. So now that we've got all this set up, the last thing that we need to do, and really the only thing we need to do, is implement this functionality. So to do that, we come back to the view controller, and inside this close popup method, what we're going to do is we're going to, whoops, didn't mean to do that. We're going to create another animation. So basically we're going to do the same thing. We'll create this animation here. We actually don't need to add the subview again, obviously, because we're just getting rid of it. But what we will do is we're going to modify the frame. So instead of being in the middle, we're obviously moving it back down to the bottom. So we can get rid of that part right there and just say the Y value should be window.frame.size.height. So it goes back down to the bottom again. Okay, last thing we need to do to really make this thing fully functional without any memory leaks, because there would have been one if we didn't do this part, is we need to add a completion handler. And so to do that, we will just define, whoops. So inside of this completion handler, we're just going to call self.popupview.remove from superview, so that every time this animation is done, it will get rid of that, so that the next time it creates a new one and adds it, or just repositions it and adds it to the subview. We don't have like multiple sitting here. Okay, so now if we go ahead and run this, this should do exactly what we want it to. Show pop-up, close pop-up. And that's delegates and protocols for you. I hope that this video has helped you get a better understanding for how they work. And if they have, give me a thumbs up. And like always, I'd love to hear some feedback from you guys. Thanks for watching.